So I'm here today with Father Ed, aka Big Mac, on the Bridges of Meaning Discord.
Father
Uh,
Eric.
Father Eric, yes, yeah. Yeah, I said Ed, didn't I? I'm sorry. Oh goodness gracious, yeah. Sorry about that.
Good morning.
Not an auspicious beginning. Um, but thank you for joining me today. What we had agreed would be interesting to talk about was to talk about the angelology of St. Thomas Aquinas, which I'm going to kind of let you open with. And then we were also going to talk about that in the context of Rupert Sheldrake and Thomas Fox's book, The Physics of Angels, which is sort of a book in the form of a dialogue. So go ahead and let you start.
My name's Father Eric. I'm a Catholic priest in North Dakota, and I am a recovering materialist. Um, I go off to seminary when I'm about 18 years old. And if you had asked me if I believed in God and if I believed in angels, I would have said, of course I do. But I wouldn't have really understood what that meant. And that's why you do 4 years of philosophy and 4 years of theology in order to get into the Catholic tradition in a good way. I really liked studying philosophy and theology. Especially the philosophy and theology of Thomas Aquinas, which is what the church asks its priests to be educated in. And so, I go along the way, and I get a little bit deprogrammed from that materialism. A big moment for me was when I actually understood that a whole could be more than the sum of its parts. That really started to put two things together for me. I started listening to Paul Vanderklay and Jordan Peterson, kind of around the big Peterson wave. And I really got into him in March of 2020 because all of a sudden I had all this free time. So that's when I got involved with the Bridges of Meaning Discord server. I've been really, really interested anytime Paul Vanderklay has been talking about spirits and how those move through us. There's kind of, there were things I always would have acknowledged, but not really understood. And basically in my mind, there was like this gap between material reality and God himself, right? And I would have said, well, the angels are, in that hierarchy, and they help God govern the universe, but I hadn't ever really understood what that means, right? Like how exactly are they involved with this? And I knew some of the basics with angels, Thomistic doctrine, they're pure spirit. They're either in beatitude or they're fallen away from God. And they can, but it wasn't a cohesive picture. Just all this talk about spirits. And then the question came to me, well, Paul really likes that example of school spirit. And is that an angel? Is that a created being that God sends on, North High School to bond everything together? And then all this talk about the principalities. So I started really having questions as to whether or not there's like a distinction between, I don't like this word, but egregores and angels. So that's a question I've been having in my head. And then what really set me off was.
Can I speak to the egregore thing really quick? Because I think there's a lot of confusion about the way that word has been gotten thrown around the community lately. I was wondering where Paul got it from, because I first encountered it through Michael Martin's books, actually. And I've been using it for quite some time before I heard Paul mention it. And so I'm like, oh, did Paul start reading Michael Martin? Was my first thought. And it's like, oh no, it's from this Rebel Wisdom thing. And it tends to get used in a morally neutral way, but certainly from a Catholic perspective, Valentin Tomberg was very, very clear that there's no such thing as a good egregore. Egregores are the idea comes out of occultism, and what they are is a sort of emergent spirit that's intentionally created by people who gather for some kind of dark purpose. Originally it's a cult, but it could also be people with mutually aligned bad intentions who create amongst them this egregore. So it's an emergent spirit that's always negative.
Okay.
And it
Well,
doesn't even have the good. It doesn't necessarily even have the best intentions of the people who are joined by that egregore in mind either.
Right. It's a self-destructive spirit.
Right, yeah, and it's perfectly happy to lead them to destruction. So it's definitely not an angel.
Okay. All right. Good. Glad we got that cleared up.
Yeah. So,
see, this is why this
Tomberg is a pretty devout Catholic and definitely very Thomist in his leanings too. So.
Okay. But it still leaves a question in my mind, I know what a rock concert's like. I know what a football game is like, and the, team spirit and all that kind of stuff. I'm trying to figure out how this stuff works. And then what really got me kind of like, okay, I need to figure this out is Jonathan Peugeot had that conversation with the author. I can't remember his name. And I only listened to Paul's commentary on it, but he commented on almost the entire thing. And then Jonathan Peugeot just throws out every interaction between two beings is angelically mediated. That's a Thomistic doctrine, And I was like, what? I never learned that. So, and so here's this, Russian Orthodox icon carver that knows more about Thomas Aquinas than I do. I was like, that can't stand. So I figured I got to start finding out about this. Yeah. So that's kind of how I got here. I'm trying to learn about these different spirits, which of them are angels, and whether or not human psychic power can create sort of spirit.
Right. So here's I can actually have an insight that I wouldn't have had before this morning, because I wish I'd got a chance to finish this book before we started, but this is Jacob's Ladder. This is actually Sergei Bulgakov's book. This is Sergei Bulgakov's treatment of angelology. And he has other stuff like that occurs throughout his works on angels, but there's an essential connection between humans and angels. And that humans are created so the angelic world is ultimately created in the service of is ultimately created in service of the human world, but at the same time, like, angels have a co-humanity and humans have a co-angelicity. And one of the verses that Bulgakov uses to kind of like tie this concept together is Revelation 21:17. When the New Jerusalem comes down, it says that it gives its measurements, and it says, which is the measure of a man, which is also the measurement of an angel. So it links like the measure of a man and the measure of an angel together. And in this book, he does the tightest link between the Platonic idea of the form and the idea of an angel that I've ever seen. But he shows how those things are also, like, basically for him, like, everything in the angelic world is hypostatic. So that would be the difference from the Platonic form, which is like very much like it kind of like removes that like hypostatic nature of the realm of ideas, right? Well, in the mind, like the angelic world, which is created like before the rest of creation in the mind of God, everything is hypostatic in the angelic world. And you can see, and this gets super interesting when, in light of, like, if you start thinking in terms of a non-atheistic panpsychism and the kind of ideas that Rupert Sheldrake is talking about in that book, Physics of Angels, then that really like explodes the cosmology to like almost unbelievable limits. So
yeah. And so it sounds like that's a Russian author that you're reading.
Yeah, he's a Russian Orthodox theologian, 20th century.
Yeah. So a lot of what he says seems to work perfectly with Aquinas. Aquinas wouldn't use the terms like co-humanity, angel. But what he would talk about is both of us having a different type of intellectual nature, and that being kind of the bridge between us. Although it's a different kind of intellectual nature. And then that hypostasicity, so these are real beings. They're not just beings of reason,
right?
A pattern that we can abstract out of the world. And
right, and
Thomas
for
Aquinas.
Aquinas, they operate by pure intuition too. So it's like they're definitely like to think of them as being as pure reason is definitely not right because they don't think the way we do.
Right. And he's very clear they're not discursive.
Right.
They don't have to walk through an argument. It's all just instant insight, what they come
Right.
to understand things. And then, okay, so you talked about the hypostasicity. The way that he expresses that is that each angel is its own species, because
yeah, Bulgakov says that too. It's they're precisely exactly the same. Like every angel is a personal being.
Mm-hmm. In its own species. So like what makes you different from me is the fact that you're over there in that body and I'm over here in this body. But we're both created according to the same pattern of humanity, and both are given a real soul and body. So that's a principle of individuation for Aquinas. But for us, for angels, it's they all have to be their own species because they're not made out of matter. Sorry, Luke Thompson.
I don't. That's yeah. I don't think. I don't know what he means. I don't think he's using. I don't think he means that they're made out of matter. I think Luke is using the word body in a weird way. I think for the way Luke is using the word body, he is using the word body to mean anything which has a persistent, recognizable unity.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Which is so he's collapsing the distinction between matter and form, which makes him he's not ultimately wrong because matter and form are always together. And this is where you can understand where Bulgakov is going a little bit further than Aquinas. This seems fundamentally right because of that, because of the fundamental link between the world as a prototype existing in the divine ideas and the world as actually instantiated in the material creation. That to me is like, it makes a very strong argument for that kind of like very strong link that he's making between the angelic and the human. And that, I think that verse from Revelation is, it certainly indicates that there's at least something to that idea, even if we ultimately want to reject it, that he's not completely nuts to suggest that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I thought I was going to say something, but it vanished. So
sorry about that. No. I'm here mostly to listen to you today.
Yeah. Okay, so here's a crazy thought that I've been having, and I'm trying to put this stuff together.
Well, Grill Country is the place to express your crazy thoughts.
Yeah. So I just for anybody who sees the caller, I'm going out on a limb here, and if somebody wants to disagree with me, we're both good Catholics, I hope. So I read on a whim, I read a short treatise by Aquinas about casting lots and divination and astrology.
Right.
And it's like somebody asked him to write something about it, and this was like a patron or something. It's like, okay, I'm not terribly interested in this, but let's go over this. And he talks about how astrology, first off, it doesn't impact human free will. That's a sovereign thing that God has given to us, and the angels and demons, they can't access that. Only God can access it directly. So we cut that out. There's no fatalism in this astrological system. Nevertheless, it was just the way they understood things, that the heavenly bodies had influence on earthly bodies, right? That the heavens are the thing that move things on earth,
right? Because they're guided by angelic forces. Ultimately, is the reason.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's just, if you're a materialist, that just seems utterly nuts, right? Because
totally nuts. Like, what are you talking about?
The gravitational forces of the sun and the moon, those can have measurable effects on Earth because they're close enough and big enough, right? So the tides are caused by that. But once you get out to Mars, it's too small, it's too far away. How do you get that?
But even have a conversation about causation. Like, already implies like some kind of intelligibility to the order of things that would it be completely superfluous, unnecessary, unless there was some intelligence behind it. So the very existence of consciousness itself, to me, this is what I think. This is kind of what like the older kind of model is pointing at, like in the microcosm macrocosm model is kind of pointing at, is like that's there's something that Bulgakov says in another writing where he says that one of the differences between like the angelic and the human nature is that angels don't have a world, because they don't have a material created body, whereas we have a world to interact with. But if that world itself, like without an intelligence to interact with it, doesn't have any, it has no purpose, no meaning, and like everything we say about it makes no sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this brings me to an interesting point that I just studied. Obviously, so this is something I'm trying to wrap my head around, is how angels can only be said to be in a place kind of analogically, right? So if they're moving something in material creation, then they are said to be in that place as containing it, not being contained by it. So that was a big point. So you could think of, let's imagine just, I don't know exactly how this works because it's all above me, but let's imagine that there's an angel in charge of the orbit of Mars, that the angel could be said to be around that and moving it, but not contained by it. And if the angel stopped moving Mars, then it wouldn't be there anymore. But that's not, it's not proper for them to be in a place because they don't have bodies, right? That's what it means to have a body, is to be in a place. Okay, so that was one point of an argument.
Well, yeah, that kind of ties. So if you remember in the Physics of Angels, when like Sheldrake starts talking about the way photons work as a way to kind of conceptualize how angelic movement works, because like from the place of the photon, there's no actual like passage of time,
mm-hmm.
or any actual movement from place to place. Like everything happens, like from the perspective of the photon, everything happens instantaneously.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And my eyeball and the sun are the same thing,
right?
Which is really wild.
Well, that's interesting, because that's exactly what Douglas Harding suggests in Hierarchy of Heaven and Earth, when he's talking about, like, as you go up and down the hierarchies, he's like, that's what he's kind of pointing at, is like how we as the human observer, the microcosm of which the macrocosm is a model, like when we look to the sun, like we participate in the being of the sun. So
just make sure you got those special glasses on.
Yeah, right.
The sun's got a lot of being to it.
Yeah, yes, correct. It does. Yes, exactly. Be very careful. Yes. Mm-hmm. Which is why it's so popularly used as in theological analogies.
Mm-hmm. So okay, so we got this idea of the heavenly bodies moving things on Earth, right? And then we've got also this idea of the angels not being in any particular place except somewhat analogically by causation. They're moving something here. And then I get to a third point in Aquinas. Oops, phone call. Hope that's not my pastor.
Mm-hmm.
It's my pastor. I got to talk to him.
No problem. I'll pause it.
He has.
All right.
My pastor has lost his keys.
Oh, okay.
And I need to let him into the church.
Okay, no problem. Understand.
Yeah.
All right, we're back. Do you remember your train of thought at all?
Yes.
Okay, so, good.
We've got this concept of heavenly bodies, heavenly realities influence things on Earth, which, as far as I knew, was the regular material realm. And then in his work on the creation of the angels, he sees two options: one, that they're created at the same time as the creation, or they're created slightly before. And right. he favors it being the same time that the angels and the world were created, but he acknowledges that other fathers had different opinions and all that. And then he says, and that the angels would have been created in the Empyrean, right? The highest, the heaven of heavens,
right.
And this realm of fire and light, which are mostly, I think, analogies for us to try and understand that. And when you try and, have a naive mapping of all of that onto modern cosmology, it doesn't make any sense, right? Because we don't think we're surrounded by water. We don't think we're, heliocentric, and that they're fixed stars and then the prime mover in the Empyrean of pure light. It's like, no, the universe is different now. And so this model doesn't work anymore.
I wonder how, just really quick, I just want to interrupt very briefly. I wonder how, because I want to ask you a question, and this is just a question, you can free to answer however you like. Because I'm not sure what I think, but I do feel moved to ask the question, which is like, is that the case because of the fact of things? Is it because that's the way reality is, or is it because we're looking differently?
Yeah, we are looking differently, but I think there is a way to reconcile these models, right?
There we go. Okay.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Without having to pull in the spaceships, I think it's cool that we go to Mars, So,
well, that makes me think of it. It's like, because we can't get away from angels, because like, what do you think all this UFO nonsense is? That's because we've, like, human beings have believed in angels and spirits forever. And even deep into modernity, like, it didn't take very long before we started trying to bring them back in a way that the collective representations of modernity would allow. And the way we brought them back in is through, like, and you can see both the light and the dark side of the angelic spiritual realm, like, reflected in the UFO mythology. So it's like, there,
we got
you
the
have
Vulcans
both
on this
both
side.
narratives are there. Both narratives are there. It's like,
yeah.
It's not gone away.
Mm-hmm.
It's just shaped into this new form that is acceptable within the collective representations of our era. And we just can't, that's why I asked the question that I did earlier, is like, okay, is it really different, or is it just like, because these are our current collective representations, this is the way we're forced to see it?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, I'm open-minded on that whole angels, demons, UFO business.
I'm not suggesting that. I think they're the same thing ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what, that's why, and I think it's the same. I think the reason it's the same thing is connected to participation, right? Because we sense these things and we participate with these things positively and negatively, whether we believe in them or not. And we actually don't stop believing them, is what I'm suggesting. What, for the most of us, don't. What we do is that we just, like, rework it in a form that fits, like, the collective representations of our time and our culture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But they don't go away. They're there.
Yeah. All right. So I'm almost to the conclusion of my argument here.
Go for it.
All right. So one of the things about the astrology was, if you read the stars well, you will be able to know the opportune time to do things, right? At a very basic level, opportune time for planting and harvesting, opportune time to go to war, opportune time to make peace. You can read the stars in such a way that because the stars are moving what's happening on Earth. So if we imagine that that the angels are in fact moving things, and that we can sense these things in the realm of the spirits, I look at something like weather forecasting, right? What that is that's trying to map the patterns of heat, water, of airflows, and trying to predict how exactly, when exactly the blizzard's going to show up in Fargo. And it's not 100%, locked in because there's way too much data. But it's if you study kind of the laws of physics, the way physics goes, if you recognize these patterns, if you really put your mind into it, you can predict things with a fair amount of accuracy. So, starting on Tuesday in my part of North Dakota, they said, we're thinking there might be a blizzard on Friday, but we don't know how bad it's going to be until we get a little bit closer. And as it turns out, it was much to the north of me that got really hit. And then it was not, there was a little extra wind, but you get kind of used to that here in North Dakota. And so it's almost like when we're doing physics well, right? And when we're trying to build these mathematical models to try and predict the motion of the heavens, which we're really good at now, trying to predict the various things that science will go for, trying to predict the weather, and using the tools of a mathematical analysis to do that. That is, I think, almost the same thing as reading the stars, right? Because they were convinced that the heavens were the realm of intelligibility, right? And that things were more chaotic down here because of all the matter that's getting moved around and pushed around. So when you're doing good science, good cosmology, good physics, trying to peer into the nature of things, it's the same sort of thing that they were doing when they were doing astrology. So that's just kind of a thought I had with that. And that kind of, sometimes the Sheldrake book was a little bit wooey for me. And that's okay. We're allowed to have different opinions.
Right.
But I think that's kind of a good way of trying to think about it, right? If they're beings of pure intelligence, then I don't know. I think a mathematical model isn't a bad way to try and get at that, although it's not the only way, and it's maybe not even the best way. But
I don't know. Maybe I can let's use Einstein as an example of how this bridge might work, right? So in any true genius, their intuition is in operation as much as active intelligence, like very much so. Like every real significant scientific breakthrough, begins with a flash of intuition that we don't know where it comes from. Perhaps one might suggest that it comes from the angelic world, because the angelic beings like that, as we know from Aquinas, they operate on pure intuition, right? And they also have a strong association with the creative. And I would say that also that means creative genius of any kind. And scientific genius is really a creative genius just as much as any other kind of creative genius is. It's not just artists, right? So Einstein is a creative genius. Anyone who's capable of making amazing scientific breakthrough is also a scientific genius. So there's actually a cooperation between the angelic realm, where the flash of intuition and insight comes from, but it still has to be worked out by us through our intelligence. And one of the things that I really liked about in the Physics of Angels book was when because it points toward both the difference and the link between our world and the angelic world, was when they were talking about Hildegard of Bingen, talking about how the angels are in awe of our righteous works that we can do in the world because they're not able to do that. So the angel can inspire Einstein using since you were talking about mathematics, we'll use a scientific mathematical genius as the example, because they have the intuition, but they can't actually execute it in the world on their own. They're relying on us to bring it into being. This also that applies on the darker side too, right? So because angels don't have physical bodies, the dark angels are just as much dependent upon us to like work out, you know, their malevolent will. And and people can have like flashes of intuition that are
occult knowledge.
Right.
Occult knowledge. That's one of the signs of demonic possession is this person has knowledge they shouldn't possibly have access to.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. So what do you think about that idea?
At the very minimum, when we, you know, you can kind of distinguish between like a discursive way of reasoning, which is helpful and is good and is what we kind of have to do, and between those flashes of insight. And yeah, you know, it's hard to tell because it's happening above us. It's hard to tell exactly what's going on. We can't see the angels. We don't have our little, you know, angel Geiger counter to tell us when there's increased angelic activity. So I don't know. I don't know if we could say necessarily, you know, it had to be an angel that helped Einstein understand gravity. But that's definitely a more angelic way of knowing when we get those flashes of insight versus going through discursive, rational argumentation. So anyway, it's you know, I think another
but okay, but let's talk about, think of every person has a guardian angel, right? This is like, and this is like standard. I mean, for us, we don't have any problem with that. Protestants might be freaking out, but that's okay. So every person has a guardian angel. It seems to me perfectly plausible, from my point of view, that Einstein's intuition that leads to his breakthrough to the theory of relativity comes to him from his guardian angel, or what for Socrates was his daimon, which is the same concept. This is what, you know, so there's a deep link between like this, between the concept of angels and Platonism. There's a very deep link, because they're both like the Platonic ideas and the angels are serving the same function, right? They're both like the divine prototypes that exist in the realm of heaven, that, you know, that end up shaping what happens on the earth.
And it reminds me of something one of my very favorite professors told us when we were in seminary, was that you know, your guardian angel can stimulate your active intellect. He's got that power to do so. And so whenever you're taking a test, you should pray to your guardian angel so he can stimulate your active intellect.
And so, well, that's kind of what intuition is, though. Is that actually it's like, because you almost need to have like an intuition about something before you're really motivated to really go after it and like apply your active intellect. And you can actually see this in the person of Aquinas himself, who was like also like deeply practicing mystic, as well as being an incredible theologian. And so like Aquinas himself, it's like, it's not just coming out of nowhere. Like he's working this out after he has these flashes, because, well, ultimately I would say because he's participating in God.
Yeah. That's the difference between Abelard and Aquinas, was that Aquinas was holy.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah. And he also understood ultimately what was higher too. You know, which is why after he had his most profound mystical experience toward the end of his life, he looked back at the Summa and said it was straw.
And straw is sometimes useful.
Right. Yeah. Straw is very sometimes useful. I'm not discounting it at all. No, I didn't mean that in terms of discounting.
No, I don't think he meant it either.
No, he didn't either. No. Right.
Because literally in one of the earlier visions, Jesus himself says, "You have written of me well, my son." You know, so
right, yeah, there you go. Yeah. So
that just makes me wonder about this empyrean, right? This heaven of pure light. And this is, I don't know, this is probably just a frame breaking idea for me, but it almost seems like it has to be right on top of everything, right? Like just behind and underneath and above and beyond and inside of everything is heaven. It's all right on top of us. but also not anywhere. In the same way that my pinky has just as much as my soul as my whole body, because the soul isn't a body. It isn't limited by extension. You know,
Right.
it's
Right.
it's a spiritual being, and it's just hard to think that way.
Yeah. I just kind of see it as like as like a layered situation. But I don't. But also, it's like it's still it's hard to come up with an image because I don't think those because it's too limiting.
Mm-hmm.
So any kind of like, you know, physical imagery that you use is going to like give you the wrong idea because it's going to limit the extension and expanse of what you're talking about.
And that's
Too
why I
much.
kept on using contradictory prepositions to try and describe it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Oh man, it's wild. It's
wild. Yeah. So how
but
did
it's exciting. It's exciting.
So how did how did a former materialist end up becoming a Catholic priest who's now having a conversation about angels? How did that happen?
Well, I was never formally a materialist, right?
But you were just kind of like implicitly embedded in like the kind of default materialism that our culture brings with it.
Right.
Is that what you're saying? Okay. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. So I would have always recited
literally everyone born in 20th or 21st century North America, or pretty much most other parts of the world, is in that boat.
Mm-hmm. And it was, so I grew up in a Catholic family. We always went to church on Sundays. And I really, when I was in about fourth grade, I really liked being an altar boy. And we were at a church at that time that had a very reverent and disciplined liturgy, and that really appealed to me. So I think probably the early seeds of my vocation were there. And so I go off to seminary to discern whether or not God's calling me to be a priest. And that's when I started, it was probably my second year of seminary where the hard questions really started to hit. It was a class on philosophical anthropology. And that, I'm about 20 at this time, right? So ready to learn, but I don't know anything. I know a few things now. Probably say the same thing about myself 10 years from now. And it was that the questions of what a materialist universe would mean for humanity, determinism, lack of free will. Sam Harris was like the firmware I was running on was Sam Harris, the same sort of thing. And that always presented itself as a temptation and kind of this like black pit that I would end up in if I didn't. And that key insight with music, actually. How all these different tones, these different vibrations, right? They're illusion, but they become so much more when they're all put together, when they're all realized. And then me understanding that my soul was the same sort of thing, that it actually put all of me together in such a way that I wasn't bound by the causally determinate firings of the neurons in my brain, but it actually transcended that. So that was a key insight for me.
But that's no one's experience of it though. This is because like we live so much in our age, like in our abstractions, but like if there's zero people who, when you're in the process of listening to a beautiful piece of music and you're just listening to it and participating in its beauty, and you can't not participate in its beauty, like there's the layer of participation is always there. Like Barfield is very clear about that. Like if participation ever went away entirely, we would be completely lost. So there's always even within the withdrawal participation, there's always a layer of participation. So if you actually examine like your experience, like honestly, before you start engaging in that second layer abstraction about your experience, you know what the experience is.
Right. So what this was for me, an exorcism, basically, because I had this evil way of looking about things, and the truth came in and drove that away. So, and that actually, made it possible for me to start studying theology properly. That's why the Catholic way of doing things, you do that philosophy first, get some of those fundamentals down. Hey, guess what? Whole can be more than the sum of its parts. And then theology, you're now free to do theology.
Yeah, Thomas Aquinas College, we read Porphyry and Plato and Aristotle before touching even Augustine, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, they would have done scripture first. After,
yeah, we had theology was a component like all 4 years.
Was that Thomas Aquinas in California?
It was only when I was at Thomas Aquinas, it was only the Santa Paula campus.
My cousin went there. So.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The New England, they since added a New England campus, but when I was there, it was only Santa Paula. So.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, when you said Thomas Aquinas, I thought you meant like back in the day, he would have studied all that stuff first.
Oh, no. I'm sorry. I said at Thomas Aquinas. I should have put the college part at the end, at Thomas Aquinas College. Mm-hmm. So I was just affirming like the kind of like, get that foundation. And for us at Thomas Aquinas, it's the foundation is in like classical philosophy. Mm-hmm. I still don't get like a modern philosophy. I don't know anybody reads it. It's worthless.
Not for fun.
Well, it's just like
a Socratic dialogue could be fun.
Right, exactly. A Socratic dialogue can be fun. Well, to me, here's the problem. The problem with it is like, here's the problem with it. It's a very fundamental problem. It's like you don't understand first principles properly. Like in the classical model, like the first principles are simply given through intuition. Like they're like pre-axiomatic. Like you just can't like, and most of modern philosophy is all about trying to get around the first principles that are obvious from intuition, because it's like completely divorced from our phenomenological experience of the world, which is the only world that we have. We can't live in another world. There's no
that's not what Mark Zuckerberg says.
Right. Well, yeah, we really can't. There is no other world that we can live in. We cannot. There's no possibility. Yeah, I suppose that's it. Like, it's like, let's see, that's one of my favorite things that Luke says, actually, is like, he has this like techno babble theory where he talks about like ultimately like what the tech overlords are doing is like, is building a body for Antichrist. Like, they're trying to build like that's what they're really trying to build for us, a world that will allow us to escape from the phenomenological world that we've always all shared and must live in. Mm-hmm. And so much of modern philosophy is about just trying to cast doubt on what are undeniable intuitions of our experience. Well, you can't have a philosophy that philosophy is supposed to be about the love of wisdom. Where is there wisdom in creating a philosophy that is completely disconnected from the way you must live in the world?
Yeah, it's just regular old sophistry, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, well, yeah. I mean, like Nietzsche was refuted in the Gorgias. Why do I mean, I read him because I need to in order to engage with people that are into him, but that's the only reason I read it, is to engage with people that are into it. But to me, it's like from the first, like before I was a Christian, from the first time I read Plato deeply, it's like, oh, all modern philosophy is garbage. Like all the stuff that I've been reading, and I was a high school debater, and I was a Lincoln Douglas debater, and Lincoln Douglas topics tend to be like very like they're values oriented, so they tend to get deeply philosophical. So I read a lot of philosophy for the sake of debate. And most of it, I read Kant and Dewey and a bunch of modern philosophers, but
you were reading it for the sake of debate.
I was reading it for the sake of debate. Right. Exactly. Mm-hmm. I was reading it for the sake of debate, and I didn't really care. I just was looking for whatever was going to work for the argument I wanted to make, which is just like practicing sophistry and is implicitly postmodern. Mm-hmm. And which is why lawyers tend to be bad people. Not all of them. There's some good lawyers. There are people out there trying to do good. I'm not saying
they make as much money though.
They probably don't make as much money. Right. Exactly. And yeah, so it's just like, and then it's like, oh, like everything's right here. It's like Whitehead said all philosophies but footnotes on Plato, and he's 100% right. So yeah.
Well, I'll be happy to add another footnote onto Plato. Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
glad.
Yeah.
I'm just glad I got, my first class was ancient philosophy. I didn't ever have to mess around with, analytic logic from the beginning.
Right. Right.
Like my first experience of philosophy, when I learned that I wasn't good at philosophy. So thank you, Dr. Solis, for giving 19-year-old Father Eric a slap.
Okay.
Was the Nicomachean ethics, Why are we doing this? What is everything? What is a human being? What is the end of a human being? So, yeah.
Yeah, I got my philosophy instructor at Thomas, my freshman year philosophy instructor at Thomas Aquinas College. I came in agnostic, having been like like I said, a high school debater, and kind of like I like Nietzsche, which a lot, and I was kind of like I just had a postmodern temperament, like by nature, I would say. Just kind of Gen X, kind of cheerful, Gen X cheerful nihilism, pretty much would have been like. But I wanted something more, and that's kind of I think that's why they accepted me, because I was like in my like essay, I was like, it's like I see people of faith, and it's like that would be great, but it just doesn't seem to be on the table for me. So to me, agnosticism seems to be just like anyone who's not an agnostic is lying to themselves, was basically my view when I went in. And there's a level at which that is true once you understand like humility and the limits of knowing. But that doesn't but there are more ways of knowing than through that kind of like left brain rational certainty. That's the problem. It's just like if you're cutting off like all other ways of knowing, then you can kind of easily get caught in that trap. And yeah, there's a limit to your knowledge. And in some ways, that idea that there's kind of there is an inherent agnosticism to things because there's an inherent limit to our knowledge. That doesn't mean that there aren't other things that are more fundamental that you can understand through other ways, like through intuition, like I was just talking about, right? So it's like you can't reason your way to correct first principles. You just have to accept them from intuition. So yeah. And I remember when I was first introduced to, we had this old conservative German Jesuit on campus, Father Gerard Steckler. And the first time I was introduced to him, he was like, he had been on my admissions panel and had read my essay, because he's like, oh yes, Nathan, you're the one who thinks he's an agnostic. Like, you think I'm an agnostic? It's like, yeah. So that kind of tortured me, and that's kind of like what started me on my trajectory of like, coming to be a person of faith. So
the good Jesuits are always the best.
Yeah. He was like he had taught at Gonzaga at some point earlier in his career, so he had lived in Washington, and he was not a fan of Washington, and he had been in like the less bad part of Washington, because like Eastern Washington is, although in Spokane, which is a bigger city, but he was like, oh, like, yeah, he was not a fan of Washington, like the most atheistic state in the Union. By far.
Yeah. Okay. Thomas Aquinas College. Didn't know that you went there. It's good.
Yeah, I went to Thomas Aquinas and Evergreen. That's how weird I am. How about that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
can you get
and
more?
Now you've got opposite? A YouTube channel with literally everybody on it, huh? Makes sense.
So do you have anything more that you wanted to say, either about Physics of Angels or Sheldrake's book?
Yeah. So not say, but the big question I'm still wrestling with is how the spirits work when it seems to be that human beings are, so maybe I just need to be a little more open-minded, but I remember football games in high school, and the spirit in the stadium, it was moving me to cheer because I wasn't very good at football, so I was on the sidelines, and moving the whole stadium to cheer and getting the team to all play together. And maybe I just need to be a little bit more open-minded that maybe there is an angel that watches over Shanley High School, and will bring the football team together for a good, clean game. It just, I don't know, I'm just trying to figure this out.
Well, if you map it onto, okay, so if we're going to understand that, like, if we're going to understand that the angelic world has a link to the world of divine ideas, and that the angels are essentially hypostasized forms, then the answer to that question is yes. And then which is one of the things I really like about Sheldrake's book, because he talks about how, like, you're dealing with astronomical numbers when you're talking about angels, and as our understanding of the cosmos expands, it's like our understanding of just how, you know, how many there are is becomes staggering. And I also like how they talk about how they have different, different spheres of influence, which you kind of understand in terms of the traditional idea of the, the 9 hierarchies of the angels, right? So it's like you have angels that have like smaller and greater spheres of influence.
And I think you're linking to the heavenly realm of ideas is right, and you see the angels as agents of providence, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Like God wanted this football game to happen. It's a part of his plan for the whole universe.
Well, Gakov uses the term executor, right? So it's like they're not create, like it's everything is created by God in Christ, but the angels are the executors of that creation, which is and our creation is like it's an evolutionary becoming, right? We're not like, nothing is what it will be yet. It's all still like, only God knows what it will be in its final form at this point. Well, we do know from Revelation, but we still don't understand it, right? So it's like we have these hints and these glimpses, and we can be excited about it, but we don't know or understand it, nor can we. We can just anticipate it and be excited about it. So
and the human participation in this creation of the spirit is on the will, right? So I chose to play football, right? All the other players on the team, they chose to play football. All the refs, they've chosen to be refs. All of the coaches, they've chosen to be coaches. All of the spectators have chosen to be spectators. And so the spirit of the game needs all of our matter being brought together before the pledge goes off and we start cheering.
So this is one of the things I was that blew my mind in this Bulgakov book that I started reading this morning. He actually says that the angels actually choose their angelic role, which you can understand, and he also says that the way Lucifer becomes like the prince of this world is because Lucifer actually was the angel of the world. So that's how, and when he breaks away and rebels against God, that's how the world becomes, imprisoned through his malevolence. So
if there are other worlds, they might not have fallen.
Right, just as Lewis suggests in his space trilogy. Yeah, that's right. That's right. So that means, which brings us back to all the weird modern stuff about aliens. It's like, okay, if we can relate this to this idea about angels, it's like, well, there's lightness and there's darkness. It's possible that, there could be communication from unfallen worlds, that might lead us toward light, and there's also a possibility that, of the opposite. So it's very, I prefer the ancients, but at least I don't want to discourage people from, if people are interested in that, it's like, I think it's better. I think it's better than, well, it just goes to show you how unsatisfying a flat materialism is, really, because it's like, you're still trying to bring this back. Even if you call yourself a materialist,
even if you try and live in it, the only way to do it without going nuts is to negate yourself, right? That's the whole Sam Harris meditation,
right,
Western Buddhist thing, is like, no, you don't really exist. And so it doesn't matter that you live in a miserable materialist universe. You don't have to suffer because you don't exist.
I don't know if he means that you don't exist, though. I think he means that you don't exist as he doesn't, what he means is you don't exist merely as a self.
Okay.
Which is true, because a person, whether you're talking about a hypostasis, a human hypostasis or an angelic hypostasis, it is relational fundamentally. Mm-hmm. Like there are connections between all of these things. Like ultimately, like he's still malnourished and impoverished, but there's not like that little bit like that's, I mean, there are some Christians that could benefit from understanding that there really is no like absolute fundamental self that is properly disconnected from everything else. That's actually a satanic impulse to want that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, maybe it's the whole you're just watching a movie thing then.
Yeah, that's the part where it's like, yeah, where it's all illusion. Well, I mean, it kind of doesn't matter because it's still the only world that we have. Mm-hmm. Right? But to understand, there is value in understanding that like the phenomena of this world as they present themselves isn't all that there is. That's kind of like what we're talking about implicitly when we're talking about like the angelic world, that there are more layers to this layered cake of reality, and that's not all that there is. But we still don't have any other world that we can interact with. So the key is learning to like connect ourselves to that world in such a way that we can begin to see glimpses of it shining forth in our world. Does that make any sense to you?
A little bit, but I think I lost the argument.
No problem. Well, it's not an argument.
Yeah. Well,
it's not an argument.
The chain.
I'm painting a picture. Yeah. So, well, let's go back. Okay, let me go back to, we were both talking about music, right? I think this is a clear example of where you can see it, right? Let's say you're listening to like one of like John Tavener's like beautiful liturgical pieces of music, right? And when you're immersed in that, like you if you're really open to it, you can see that shining forth. You can feel it calling to you. Mm-hmm. You can participate with it. But beauty is really our primary means of like, and this Sam Harris actually kind of gets that too, although he backs away from it. But when he talks about like staring at the puddle and being able to like appreciate ineffable beauty, like even in like a puddle, he backs away from that, says, oh, it's not really there. Why is it not really there? Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. So that's where Sam Harris goes wrong. He's not wrong in saying that you can see ineffable beauty in a puddle, or in a leaf falling from a tree, or in the face of your loyal dog who loves you unconditionally. Like any of those things can be glimpses of that, where you at least for a moment, even the most materialistic person is participating with that. So the key is through spiritual practice, to get yourself to live and see that more often. The more deeply rooted we are in our spiritual practice, the more we come to be able to see the beauty in all things, mm-hmm. because they're all created by God and they all do have beauty.
And kind of my experience of beauty and what that does to me as a believer is I'm almost instantly go straight through it to gratitude and praise.
Yes, exactly right. Yes.
I was praying exactly in my home church last night, yesterday morning, and I looked at the stained glass window that had it was the Last Judgment, but the wedding banquet, right? So Jesus coming as the bridegroom, and then there was an angel holding my home parish, like an image of my home parish in an orb, and it was like immediately, wow, And I was primed and ready to have that experience.
Right. And
it was just praise and thanks, wordless praise and thanks, which is the best kind.
Right. Yeah. So that's kind of what I think. That's why I kind of like got on Paul a little bit, because it's like, yeah, there is the Sam Harris. It's definitely the village atheist who says a lot of dumb stuff, and he absolutely strawmans people all the time, and he is a bad listener and all those things. But this thing that he's talking about is not worthless.
There's a reason he's at peace with himself.
Right. Exactly.
Because he's got this little chunk of something.
He just needs to come to a deeper understanding of it.
Yeah. Well, I think there's
God willing, he will.
I think there's a little bit of the shepherd in Paul, where he sees people who take ideas of Sam seriously and it hurts them.
Yeah.
And that's going to get a little bit of umbrage in the heart of.
I have no issue with Sam Harris having less followers. I don't think, on the whole, I don't really like.
Yeah.
Like, it was really like my complaint was like very narrow. It was just like, okay, you know, it's like this has a place within our tradition too. This thing that he's talking about, like it has, and that's actually, it's much deeper roots. So that was it.
Okay. So I want to pick your brain on something now that we're talking about beauty. Are you in the beauty is a transcendental property of being camp?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
So my mind is kind of split in two ways. I think kind of the ancients saw beauty as being a.
Uh-oh.
All right, the angel of ExpressVPN. The angel of ExpressVPN disconnected us.
Yeah, that's good. I like that.
So beauty is a transcendental property of being. The ancients saw it as only a property of material and therefore couldn't be gone all the way up on the ladder of being. But, you know, I'm open-minded to seeing how spiritual substances can be seen as beautiful. So what's your argument on that?
My argument on that beauty is a transcendental property?
Yeah.
Gosh, it's something that's just obvious to me. It's like truth, beauty, goodness, those are the transcendental properties. I would say that, and they're all interconnected, ultimately. So they're all one in God, and their unity is in God. But I think my thinking about it is like, it's ultimately probably rooted in Plato. Like, because beauty is that which draws us toward the good. It is yeah. So basically, I would say my argument is Dante and plus Plato. So, but it's so, to me, like, beauty is such an obvious property that's perceived through their intuition, but I've actually never bothered to like develop a formal argument in terms of like, how do I know this? Well, I know it because it's obvious, because I see it all around me, and when I see it, it ultimately like makes me grateful that I get to be alive in this world that God has created. Mm-hmm. So it's just like, it's not something I've ever questioned.
Yeah, and I'm not saying beauty is unimportant or only a merely relative thing. Especially my great passion is liturgy. I want that to be as beautiful as possible. I'm having a hard time distinguishing it from the good. That which draws, the good being that which draws us. And so I think Aquinas's aesthetics are, what is it? It's unity, truth, and proportionality. I think I'm getting that right. So unity, thing can be beautiful only insofar as it is one, right? Mm-hmm. Truth, there was something deeper there, but I've lost it. And then proportionality, though, that's the big thing, right? That proportionality is only a property of material things, right? And so something is beautiful insofar as it, and we can express it mathematically, but it isn't ultimately a mathematical sort of thing. And since proportionality is only limited to the material realm, you can't actually send that up into the angelic realm or into God himself, right? Who is absolutely simple. And so that doesn't admit proportionality. And so I don't think, pretty sure Aquinas didn't list it as one of the transcendental properties.
Yeah, I know Aquinas doesn't. That's actually like where Aquinas differs from Augustine amongst others. So but you can still kind of like there actually, maybe I'll send it to you after the fact. I can see if I can find it. I saw a lecture. It was a long time ago, so I can't really remember the details of it. But I actually saw a lecture a while back. It may have been by DC Schindler, but I'm not sure. But it was a Catholic theologian who was talking about how you can actually piece together beauty as a transcendental property through Aquinas. So
Okay.
maybe I'll send that to you
And like I
afterwards.
said, I'm not dogmatic on this point,
Right.
but I am questioning enough to stir the pot when I just hear people say truth, beauty, and goodness. It's like, okay,
So no, that's fine. Yeah, and I do realize that it's not. Yeah, that Aquinas is not explicit on that. So what the argument that I have encountered is that even though Thomas isn't explicit on that, he is implicit in it. So and I'll try to find that resource and send it to you later after the fact. But to me, it's like I don't need an argument.
yeah,
I don't.
yeah.
I
Well,
don't need an argument.
and what I'd say, my argument is that it's an aspect of the good, a really powerful and compelling aspect of the good, rather
Right.
than aspect of being as such. And it would give, we talked about that Hildegard, angels are amazed at humans. It would give humans like their own sphere of of influence, of being, of possibilities. If only we can create something that's beautiful, you know,
Right.
that God had to create Michelangelo and an entire universe in order to create the Pieta. That
Right.
that wasn't an angelic possibility. Um,
Right.
so just a thought.
Right. Well, but then I don't know. I mean, I'm but but is I mean, does I mean the Pietà is magnificent, but does the Pietà like really does it actually like compare to the beauty of the natural world as created by God?
No.
Right. So that means that beauty as created by humans still has to have a transcendental source. There has to be a most beautiful, right? And I don't see what could be most beautiful other than God. If that which is most beautiful is God, then beauty participates in God and is therefore a transcendental property.
Well, I would say it has to pre-exist at least virtually in God, but not everything that pre-exists in God would be a transcendental property of being, right? So, like um, physical force, the
Mm-hmm.
most powerful physical force in the
Gotcha,
universe,
gotcha,
that
gotcha.
has to pre-exist virtually in God, but it isn't um, necessarily a transcendental property of being, but it pre-exists virtually because he can create it. Uh, so,
Right, right. Gotcha.
and like, boy, we have the created universe. That's an argument right there. The stars and the harmonious ordering of all things. Uh, and are angels merely agents of carrying that out, or do they participate in the creation of beauty? Oh goodness, I'm losing track of myself here.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Um, and I would say no. They're only like it goes back to that whole like executor role, right? So like this is kind of like a unique human property in that only we are capable of creating beautiful and righteous works, beautiful and good works in the world, and you know that in a way that angels can't. So yeah, I don't think that. I think they only. I'm not sure that. Yeah, I don't think angels have the same creative capacity, except through their link to us.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make
Yeah.
any sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So they kind of like they participate indirectly. Like you can go back to any one of the number of analogies that we used earlier, where it's like, okay, you have this like, angelic inspiration, like the idea of the poetic muse, right? The poetic muse, Socrates' daimon. Let us suggest for a moment that Einstein had a flash of intuition inspired by his guardian angel, and so on. Any number of examples, but that in order to come into being in the world, like it's only human beings that actually have a sub-creative capacity because we're in the world. Does that make sense?
I think so. And then that gets us back to my initial question: is what did Pajot mean when he said that all being is, any contact between two beings is always mediated by angels?
Because the angelic world is the metaxu. Like, I think that's just obvious. Like, yeah, okay, yeah. That's
is the metaxu.
The metaxu, the middle space.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's actually it's they help bring the world of the divine ideas together with the creative world.
All right. That's exciting.
All right.
Well, this has been super helpful.
Oh, good.
These are all ideas that have been bouncing around my head, and you've helped me put them into a good order.
Well, I'm glad I could be of help. You helped me too. Like you helped me think of you helped me realize like where I need to like clarify my own thinking. We're very I found you to be a great dialogue partner. So thanks for joining me today. I still think this topic is a really rich topic. And I wonder if you would like to have another conversation about angels, like maybe both of us can kind of go back to the drawing board and follow up. I kind of like I don't know if you're interested in or not, but I found, like, I just started this book, Jacob's Ladder, this morning, and I found it to be like pretty thrilling.
Is it one of those ones that's out of print and impossible to find?
No, I got it on Amazon and paperback for $22.46. It's readily available. The translator is not one that I have. Boris Yakim is the normal Bulgakov translator, but this one is translated by Thomas Allen Smith, and it's really good. It's very readable.
Thomas Allen Smith is the translator?
Yeah, the translator is Thomas Allen Smith, and it's Sergei Bulgakov, Jacob's Ladder. And we can still talk about Aquinas again too, because we can kind of compare like Catholic and Orthodox perspectives on angelology, and I think there's a topic we can go much deeper into. And then I will definitely try to find that lecture on beauty as a transcendental implicitly in Thomas Aquinas, and maybe we can talk about that too. And I can do some more thinking about like a systematic defense of my position, which I just like, to me, it's just like, so yeah. Thank you, Eric, for joining me today. I appreciate your time.
Yeah.
And I'll get in touch with you later, and we can schedule a follow-up.
All right.
All right.
It's been great. Thank you.
That's been fantastic. Thanks.